What do you think about the future of the solution-focused model? What do you think is the most important discussions or developments?
Well, some of the conversations are difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you and I are both on the solution-focused list that Harry Corman moderates. And some of those conversations have been very difficult to listen in on and watch and sometimes participate in because it seems like there's a desire to maintain the approach as Insoo and Steve developed it. At the same time, there have been some wonderful changes, some things that are seen as improvements by a lot of people. For example, the best hopes question from the people at Brief in London. And then other people who seem to think that almost anything you do, as long as you can say, well, one of the rules of solution focus is if it's not working, do something different. And so I did something different, and so it's solution focus. And many of us would look at that and say, doesn't fit my definition at all.
What do you mean? What do you think about? For example, what would be an example of that?
Asking people details about their problems. Sometimes people need to talk about their problems. Sometimes we call that venting. Sometimes they just need to talk about how tough life is. And I think it's important for us to listen to that. But I think the solution-focused approach then is to listen for the openings that give us a clue about a solution-building question that we can ask, an exception, usually, or something that says, well, what would you like your future to be like? What does it look like when you think about your future? And ask questions about that, however you get to that point. But it's always looking for openings for solution-building questions from what I consider a solution-focused stance, which is collaborative, client-focused, solution-oriented in some way, non-pathologizing, and so forth. So the conversations that talk about motivational interviewing, for example, as being a solution-focused approach. In my definition, it's not, because it looks more at what has not yet been accomplished, rather than exceptions, what has been accomplished, and what we could be talking about in terms of what a person wants in life or a family wants in life, that isn't even talking about solutions necessarily, but is talking about a life where the concern that they voiced is no longer a concern. It's either gone or it's not considered a concern. So that to me is the difficulty in the conversations of the development of the approach. I don't know what there is to be developed, because the basics of the stance and the assumptions are so simple, so elegant. I don't know how they could be improved upon, because one of them already is small change. Helps create big change. We don't have to talk about problems because the solutions aren't necessarily related to the problems. So I think the evolution then is in the language, perhaps, that we use. For example, if we don't want to talk about solutions because they imply problems, some people have begun to think, well, let's talk then about a life that does not include the problem as identified as a problem. Somebody might have trouble walking. They can't walk very long distances. And it's a problem because they want to go places. And so then we begin to talk about, where do you want to go? What are you going to be doing when you get there? And looking back, how did you get there? And we're no longer talking about walking. And we might say to that person, or somebody else might say to that person, how is your walking? And they say, oh, well, I still have trouble walking, but that's not a problem anymore. That wasn't a problem, except in the way that I looked at it, which is what Steve talked about.
Yeah.
He talked about that a lot.
Facts of life and...
Yeah, that if it can't be resolved, if it can't be changed, it's not a problem, it's a situation. And I've come to really understand the notion of accepting. That sometimes we have to accept things and we can still have a good life somehow. Even Joel Simon talks about that. Joel Simon worked with hospice in New York State. So he worked with a lot of people who were dying, and family and friends of people who were dying, and workers, people who were working in hospice, nurses, chaplains, caretakers. And he learned that even people who are dying, and you can't change that, could find a way to live as well as they could. And the same with their family members, that they couldn't change it. And they couldn't change their grief. That was a fact of life. That was a situation. But they still could figure out how to live as well as they could and accept some things as situations that couldn't change. So maybe that's where we're going, is in the language, but that it will still be solution-focused, because Steve used that title, and so I think we're going to keep it. Brief, because he used that title, and I think we're going to keep it, but we're changing the way we think about it in the details of how we accomplish it. Maybe. I don't know. It's kind of fun to watch. It's fun to go to the conferences and hear people talk about it.